very quick overview. Basically, this whole chapter, I kind of had a little paragraph of like what I thought it was all about, and it starts off kind of like God warns his people before he judges them. Our privilege of knowing him means that we're also responsible to listen and live for him. That's a big difference there, okay? So we're going to go through the whole chapter, as we always do. I'm splitting it down into 3 sections, and then finish with 3 different thoughts at the end there again. So section 1, we're starting off with verses 1 through 6, and I've titled it Privilege and Responsibility. This is a really interesting chapter because there's lots of questions. And there's like, fair few questions there, and then the main question right at the end. All those questions kind of lead to it, But the way this starts, hear this word. This word in Hebrew is Shema. It means hear and obey. Amos is reminding Israel that God rescued them from Egypt and entered into a covenant with them. Can anyone remember what covenant means? You know what covenant means? Promise. And I think that's a really key thing. When God pulled them out of Egypt, got them safely through the Exodus into their promised land, what was the covenant? Benaiah, do you know that?
They would follow him for all their days, and he would protect them.
Yeah, and there's this cool thing he says, like, I will be your God, and you will be my people. That's such a cool promise, right? To be like, you're not even just following blindly, you're following God who says, actually, you're now one of my people. You're part of my family. You're part of who I want to save in that way. And God wants everyone to be saved. But in this situation, to pull them out of slavery is an amazing thing. God says as well that you only have I known in verse 2. You only have I known. It's more than just knowing someone, right? To get to know someone would be like to start a friendship. We haven't known you guys for very long. You know my name's Jamie, I know your name's Benaiah, right? Same thing with like Abby and Army. Obviously, I have a different knowing of my son. Make sense? Because I know him. I've known him from the very beginning, and I know him from when I was changing his diapers all the way up to now, right? And it's embarrassing, but it means a different thing. So when God says, actually, you only have I known, it's not just this like, oh, hey, we're buddies and I know you like a friend. It's like, I know you deeply, and I know you personally, and I know you with a covenant love, a love of promise, a love of more than just surface level. And that's kind of what you want. If you guys have your best friend, if you think in your life right now who your best friend is, and your best friend is someone who's kind of surfacey, not very committed, not very like all the way in, and you turn around and say, actually, I want a best friend who is a covenant love kind of best friend. I think that's a big difference. Like a father knows a son is kind of like how God knows Israel. And when he says, I'll be your God and you will be my people, he's saying not just this like surface level love. He's saying this deep, heartfelt connection with them. I will save you. I'll bring you through the Exodus. I'll bring you to the promised land filled with milk and honey. What an amazing promise that is. It's kind of different to some of the other promises that we've seen and maybe you've had in your life. I promise to get you the best gift for Christmas. Then grandma rocks up on Christmas Day and buys you these nice little socks. And you're like, the best gift? I wanted a PlayStation 5 and you got me socks. Expectations are different. Whereas we look at it and we go like, the love of God is so much more than we could ever understand. So this covenant love goes deeper, it's more meaningful, can never be defeated, and it's completely true. And it's such a beautiful thing to think about. That's the love that God has for us, his people. If we call him our God, he will call us his people. That's an amazing covenant promise there, So this word, kind of to know, where he says, whom you only have I known in verse 2. This word is quite similar to the same word used in John 17:3, where it says, and this is life eternal, that they might know thee, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, who thou hast sent. That know isn't like, I know you as a buddy across the street. Hey, how's it going, Jeff? Oh, how's it going? You know, distance. That knowing is, I know Jesus Christ. I believe Jesus Christ. I follow Jesus Christ because I know who he is and what he's done. Knowing him at a surface level isn't a relationship. That's kind of like a long distance thing, you know? Back in my school days, I didn't spend long in school. I was bad. I got kicked out, and it's a different story. But we did a thing where we were pen pals, and you had to write a letter, and you'd write a letter to someone in a different country. And I don't know how they worked this out, but they were like, hey, I was born in Hanover, in Germany, in a British army camp. And they were like, you're going to write a letter to someone in Hanover, in Germany, in the British army camp. You're going to write it to another person your age over there. And I had this long distance letter friendship with this guy for a long time. And it was funny, his name's Daniel as well, but he was German, so a little different to you, but it's okay. And I never got to meet him. Never got to meet him. So I couldn't really have a true friendship with him. You know, it always started kind of funny in a letter when you read it and you go, what's been going on? And you're like, I can't answer that question very easily because I've only got 2 pages. You know, there's been a lot going on, and it takes 3 weeks for a letter to come back and forth. And yeah. So they only get a glimpse of like the highlights. And they might look at your life and go, wow, this person does so much. Or whoa, this guy doesn't do much at all. You're like, it's a letter. You're not seeing the whole context, right? So that surface level doesn't break through. When you're looking at Jesus, to know Jesus, to know who he is, to know that he was a real person, that's good. But is it good enough to get you to heaven? You actually have to have a relationship with Jesus Christ. That's the big difference. A lot of people would say they know Jesus. They've heard of him. I know how to spell his name. I know some stuff about him from a book somewhere. But to not actually have a relationship with him, that's the big difference. You need to know him on that personal level, okay? And that's a you relationship, not an anyone else relationship, okay? So, Israel's big problem that we find in these first 2 verses is they thought that being God's people, that privilege of being God's people, meant immunity. That you were immune to sin. That you couldn't do anything wrong. But actually, God says it means more. There's more greater responsibility because you know right and wrong. Did anyone understand that? Do you understand what I'm saying there? Because if you know God, then you should understand the right and wrongs of this world. If you're a Christian and you keep living in sin, is that a good thing? Or a bad thing? What do we think? Gideon, what do you think? Good thing or a bad thing? Bad thing, right? Why is that? Yeah. If I said to you, hey Gideon, I just go to the corner shop over here, the gas station, and every time I go in there, I just put a chocolate bar in my pocket and just walk out. And I just told you that. What would your response to me, knowing that I'm a Christian, what would your response be to me?
That's bad.
Right. But how do we know that's bad?
Because you shouldn't steal.
Right. The Bible tells us that, right? So if you're a Christian and you know God and you're following the laws of God, then you should take it seriously. That's a big difference to the world because the world rejects God's laws. If you're a Christian, that means you're following God's laws. You can't expect non-Christians to live up to the standard that God set. But we as Christians have a responsibility to get to that standard. We'll never reach it until heaven, until we get to see God face to face, but we should still try. Does that make sense? Good. One of my favorite theologians, a person who studies the Bible and has written many books, is a guy called Spurgeon. Has anyone heard of Spurgeon? He's kind of cool. He's got a big beard. I enjoyed listening to a lot of his stuff. And it's all online, so you can listen to a lot of his sermons. He's long past now. And there was a college in England named after him that was just shut down actually. But in one of his sermons, this is paraphrased slightly. It says, "Privilege always involves responsibility. Responsibility always involves accountability, and accountability means that God will deal with us when we sin." In regards to Christians, that privilege, that being one of God's people, means that there's a responsibility to live that way. And now we have that responsibility in our lives. It means that we're being held accountable by God to live that way. Why? Because Jesus died for our sins. We've admitted that, we've accepted it, and we're one of his people now. So to go against that, we can't live that way. That shouldn't be the way that we live. Okay? It kind of means you can't slack off. That sounds tough, because it means like some Christians take that like I can never mess up. Everyone messes up. Everyone sins. Everyone falls short of the glory of God. Everyone needs Jesus, okay? I can even think of today a handful of times that I lost my temper, or I got frustrated when someone wasn't driving the right way on 90 when I was coming back from Coeur d'Alene, and they cut me off, and I'm like, oh! Even that little reaction, I go, oh, that wasn't being gracious. That wasn't being kind. That wasn't being loving. That was me going and muttering under my breath about, oh, I'm going to drive fast next to you and tell you off. That doesn't work, does it? That's not living as a Christian. That's living the way that the world wants us to live. Get angry. Live that out that way. Do whatever you want. There's no consequence. There are consequences. And knowing God means that we have a responsibility to understand the consequences and then live to try and avoid them, to be honest. To try and avoid the sin. Okay? So verses 3 to 6, we see a cause and effect. Okay? The first thing we saw was the privilege and the responsibility. Now we're seeing the cause and the effect. So Amos rattles off a series of questions. Do two walk together unless they agree? You ever seen that in a supermarket or something like that? You got two people going, oh, I really want a Diet Coke. And they go, no, Diet Coke, I want a regular Coke. And then they start having an argument. You're like, wow, well, we're going to have this one instead of this one. And then it continues all the way along through the store, and you go, oh boy, who's going to win the argument? The whole time they've been against each other and they get at each other's throats because they're not agreeing on something so small. But actually, that's what happens in the world. If the world doesn't agree with Jesus, the way that he lived his teachings, we agree with Jesus, you can't walk peacefully together. That makes it tough to live in this world. That's when we get people kind of opposition, people getting hurt, people getting yelled at. And I think the thing about that for being Christians is the best way to see what to do in that situation is to look and see what Jesus did. How was Jesus in those situations? When he was being yelled at, when he was being criticized, when he was being hurt, when he was doing all these things, how did Jesus react? He was kind, he told the truth, and he always tried to point to God, right? So I look at it that way. Daniel starts yelling at me, says his green hoodie's a lot more better than my green hoodie. And I'm like, oh, come on, man. That's a minor thing that we can get over, right? But if Daniel starts disagreeing with me about the way that who Jesus is and stuff like that, then we can't. How do we get over that? We've got to be kind to each other. We've got to respect each other's situation there, but then try to point them to God. If you have a friend who has issues with you being a Christian, be kind. Don't argue, don't criticize in that way, but then point them to God in the way that you act, maybe the way that you live your life. The other questions here in verse 4 is, does a lion roar in the forest when he have no prey? Will a young lion cry out of his den if he have taken nothing? Do you hear a tree fall in the woods if there's no one around? Is there a sound when that happens? Yeah? Why is that? How do you know? You weren't there.
Well, because everything makes a sound.
Right. It's kind of one of these questions though, right? The way he's saying here is like, will a lion roar in the forest? Yes. Yes, a lion will roar in the forest, right? Even if he has no prey. Like, do dogs bark at random things? Yeah. Do chickens cluck? Yes. Yes, they do, right? They're very loud. So does a lion roar? Yeah. You ever been to a zoo and you've seen them do that big yawn and a roar? And you're like, oh, that's really random. They roar randomly as well. Now you see, will a young lion cry out from his den if he have taken nothing? Again, it's one of those questions you're kind of like, yeah, They will cry out because animals cry out. Animals. Have anyone heard coyotes crying out at nighttime? Usually it's like one signaling into the others, being like, "Oh, I found something. We should eat this." But sometimes they're just crying out to know where their buddies are, and that's a funny thing to think about. It's just random. Oh. I was going to say a dog's name, but like just yelling across the field like, "Frank, hi, I'm over here." You know, but I don't know why dog's name's Frank. But the point is, they do that. Animals make these noises. Animals do these things. The answer here is yes, right? And the last one here, can a bird fall in a snare upon the earth when no gin is from him? Shall one take up a snare from the earth and have taken nothing at all? All these things point to kind of one big truth. Things don't happen by accident. Okay? The calamities, the issues that Israel have faced, the famine, the plagues, the enemy raids, they weren't bad luck like the world kind of describes it as. They were actually covenant warnings that were set back in Deuteronomy 28. If you want to read that chapter, it talks about God's promises that he gives to Israel. And I think this is the thing. What Amos is saying is the pain you're going through, the suffering you're going through right now isn't random. It's kind of like God shouting, "Wake up! Wake up and look at me again! Wake up!" Okay? So, sin has consequences. We all understand that, right? Israel's disaster was not meaningless. It was a warning from God about what was going to happen if they keep pulling away. Okay? Section 2. Looking at verses 7 through 11. So God warns before he acts. So God warns before he acts. That's typically what happens, right? What was the biggest warning from a disaster that was going to happen? Can you think about in the Bible? Go.
When he had said to Noah, warn everybody that the
Yeah,
flood was
and
coming.
he gave a ton of time, right? And said, build an ark. Tell people, build an ark. Right? You can still tell them, but keep building the ark. That's a pretty big warning, because then the whole world flooded. If you weren't told, you didn't believe, what happened? He died. Yeah. Some animals, and then Noah's family, right, were the only ones that survived. Everyone else who didn't believe. Because there are people that mocked and told Noah, "Stop being stupid, man, what are you doing? It's a waste of wood." And he said, "God told me." There was a warning before what happened. And that happens a lot in the Bible. That's a really good example. So, surely the Lord God does nothing without revealing his secret plan, his inner counsel to his servants, the prophets. The thing about this is, it's not a secret plan, really, because it's written in the Bible. Everyone can read it. You know, that's the amazing thing about all of this. All of these things are just promises coming true. And we can see that through the book of Judges, as we mentioned before. But there's this word, this Greek word. It's mysterion. Has anyone heard that before? Mysterion? It sounds like a superhero name, I know. It's good. But it's the same word that Paul uses when he talks about God's revealed plan in Christ in Ephesians. So in Ephesians 3 to 6, I think I've got it up on here. Yeah, right here. This word mystery, the mystery of Christ, unto me the mystery is mysterion. Okay? How that by revelation he made known unto me the mystery, as I wrote before in a few words. Whereby when you read, you may understand my knowledge in the mystery of Christ, which in other ages was not made known unto the sons of man, as it now revealed unto his holy apostles and prophets by the Spirit, that the Gentiles should be fellow heirs, and the same body, and partakers of the promise in Christ by the gospel. The key thing here is there's this mystery that's being made known through Jesus Christ. And now it's not just the Jew who can be a follower, it's the Gentile, and then everyone else. And that's the really great news of the gospel of Jesus Christ. It's not just about the one people, it's about everyone getting to know Jesus. And that's a really cool thing to think about, because actually it's kind of like hearing this message should sound like a lion roaring. Roar! Everyone hears it, right? I like to always go back and think about The Lion and the Witch and the Wardrobe. And you see anyone seen the movie? It's not as good as the books, I know. The book is better. But the movie, there's a really cool thing that happens. They all have, Aslan's gone up to the table, he's been sacrificed. They all cheer. They all go off for the battle. They're fighting, and the bad guys are starting to win. And then he gets up onto that rock and you see his feet, diggity, 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 and he jumps to the top of the rock and he lets out this ginormous roar. And then all of them go, oh no, he's back! Right? Because it's a thing that you just heard and it was intimidating and it was powerful. And they were scared. Because that message was, oh, you haven't won. Actually, I've won. The message here is everyone can know Jesus. So it's like a lion roaring. You can't ignore it. God has spoken. So Amos must prophesy or to speak under compulsion about what's going to happen here. He's bringing a message, okay? Think of, anyone ever had like one of those Amber Alerts on your parents' phone, or if you've got a mobile phone? They go off and like, really like, and it says missing person or car being chased on the highway or something like that, and you get that description. It's kind of like that. It's a real loud noise. It's kind of obnoxious, but it catches your attention, right? It's kind of like a fire alarm. Really loud, piercing noise with the flashing lights, right? It's annoying, it's obnoxious, but it's there for your safety and to take you to safety, right? To stop you from getting hurt. That's what this lion's roar is kind of like here. And it's kind of like God saying out, hey, this is my warning before judgment. And it's part of God's mercy. This proclamation is part of God's mercy, not his cruelty, okay? So, in verses 9 through 11, we see public exposure of sin. And God calls pagan nations. Does anyone know what pagan, that word pagan means? You know?
It's another religion.
Okay, so do you know what they believe? Do you know what they don't believe in?
God.
There you go! Yeah, that's an easier way to say it, right? Pagans kind of believe in whatever they want, witchcraft, all the different sorcery, stuff like that. And that's like, all over the world, that's still practiced. And it's a terrifying thing. But in this situation, God actually calls these pagan nations, the Philistines in Ashdod and the Egyptians, to witness Israel's sin. He's using the bad guys to look at the good guys and say, oh, we're going to be pawns in God's plan here? That sounds kind of weird, right? But God uses whatever he wants and whatever he can to get people's attention sometimes. So we can see in this section 9 through 11, it says publish in the palaces, so to proclaim loudly the Hashim Miu in the palaces of Ashdod, in the palaces of the land of Egypt. Okay, then we have the great tumults in the midst thereof. The tumults is violence, it's unrest. Okay, and then this oppression, the oppressed, the crushed and the exploited people. The tough thing about this is Israel is meant to be light. Israel is meant to be God's promised people, like chosen people, his nation. And these people are seeing what's happening instead. These pagan nations are seeing what they're doing instead, and it doesn't add up. You say you're a Christian, but you do this. You say you're a Christian, but you do that. That's a really tough thing. I went to public school, and I went to public college, and then I went to a university that was Christian. But the first two were really tough, because when I became a Christian at the age of 15, everyone then started watching me really closely. Like, when's he going to mess up? He said he follows Jesus. When's he going to mess up? Who's never messed up? We all mess up, right? And as soon as I messed up, they jumped. Whoa! He's just as bad as the rest of us. Look at him, Mr. High and Mighty. And it's sad. Because just because you're saying you believe in something, people expect you to be perfect. The only perfect person is Jesus Christ. There are none righteous. No, not one yet, but Jesus. Okay? And that's the thing. We all need it. We all need to be saved. We all need to be looked after. And Jesus is the only way to do that. But Israel was meant to be a light. They're meant to be a light. And in Isaiah 42:6, it says, if I, the Lord, have called thee in righteousness, and will hold thine hand, and will keep thee, and give thee for a covenant of the people, for a light of the Gentiles. This is like a sending out to go and to get people believing in Jesus or believing in God from the Gentile nations. But he's saying, in righteousness, I'll hold your hand. I'll keep you safe. I'll give you a covenant for the people, and you'll be my light. What an amazing description. That God has called you to righteousness, not to sin. That he's going to hold your hand. That you're not walking into places on your own. That he'll keep you safe. That he's with you, right? And that he's made a promise with his people that you will be a light in the darkness. That's what he's saying there. That's a Jamie paraphrase, by the way, but that's how I read it. I think that's an amazing thing to think about. That if Israel had gotten so bad that they weren't anymore looking like light, what were they looking like? If you're not lighting up a place, what are you doing? You're just adding to the darkness, you know? And I think that's the thing. Israel had become a scandal, and even nations, pagan nations, could see their corruption, could see how bad it was. So, we see within 30 years of this happening, Assyria besieged and destroyed Samaria. Okay, that's 722 BC, which fulfills the promise that Amos is putting out here, okay? When God says something, it needs to be taken seriously, especially when it talks about destruction and changing your ways. The tough part about this, again, is if we as Christians behave badly, we're not walking in righteousness, no, we're not walking in light, we're not walking for Jesus. If we're walking the correct way, then we will be a light in darkness and we will stand out. One of my buddies said, if you're a Christian and you're living really easy, like there's no opposition to you or anything like that, then you're probably living wrong. And I was like, whoa, that's a bit rude. What if I'm just a really great guy? What if I'm just... And he's like, no, if people can't see that you're a Christian and you have opposition in those ways, then you're probably doing something wrong. I was like, oh, that's a little eye-opening. Because I always thought, hey, if I'm just being a good guy, not creating ripples, I can still be a good guy for Jesus. It's more than that. It needs to be a heart thing, you know? I need to live the right way. I need to speak the right way. I need to tell the truth and not buckle when these things come up. So that's a challenge for all of us. Because the thing is, hypocrisy ruins witness. When we're witnessing for Jesus, when we're talking to people about God, hypocrisy, living in those bad ways, ruins everything. You know? When God's people live in sin, everyone can see it. Even God's people. But God sees it also. And the Bible tells us that no sin goes unhidden. No sin gets left behind and not assessed. God sees it all. And that's a scary thing. I couldn't believe that the first time I got told that as a young Christian, I didn't want to think about it. He's going to see everything. All my good, all my bad, all my crazy, everything. Yeah. Whew. I don't know if I want to be a Christian. This is going to be a bad time. But I was told about God's love and his grace and his mercy and his forgiveness. And how that all comes hand in hand, you know? That's the beautiful part. People don't see that until they get past the, we're all sinners, right? And we all need Jesus. Okay, last section here, verses 12 through 15, a remnant and destruction, okay? This is confusing again. But if you look at it in the bigger scheme of things, the reason why this is written the way that it is because there's a lot of idolatry going on, okay? We already heard about the pagan nations, and we already heard about Israel living in sin, and this is what they were doing. They were living in idolatry. They were loving other gods and worshipping other gods to try and help out their situation. It says here that basically there's only going to be scraps remaining of what's going to happen when he can pull out the legs and an ear from the lion's mouth. There's only going to be scraps of the nation left over. That's kind of a sad thing to think about, right? Not a whole body, not a whole person, but little scraps. But it says this, I will visit the altars of Bethel, and the horns of the altar shall be cut off. First thing to think about, Bethel was Jeroboam the First's idolatrous shrine. That whole land, and we can read that 1 Kings 12. Read that chapter and read how corrupted it got. When Jeroboam the First got in charge and started saying, we're not going to worship God anymore, Yahweh, we're going to worship all these other things. And then they started building these altars. And you get these great descriptions, little pictures and things like that, that kind of look like this. This is kind of what Christian biblicalarchaeology.org, I think it is, is the website. And you can pull up what they think things would have looked like based on the descriptions in the Bible. So the horns would have been these guys, right on the end there. And he says, and he shall make the horns of it upon the four corners thereof. His horns shall be of the same, and thou shalt overlay it with brass. So there's a way they were making these things, these altars, and they were making them with these horns on them. But they're saying here that actually they're going to be hacked off. Those horns are going to be taken away. The way it's going to look is not going to be the way that it's meant to look. We can see in Exodus 27:2, kind of where it talks a little bit more about this, but around 27, the rest of it is about how they placed it, where they did it, how the temples looked. But there's great descriptions about how they did these things. The altars themselves weren't just for God. People used them to worship other gods too. If you went into a church just like this one and started worshiping a random god, and everyone's like, dear Jesus, so glad to be here. And then you start praying a completely different prayer to a completely different God. Is that going to be kind of weird? That'd be kind of weird, right? Yeah. Because this is a Christian church, right? We believe in the one true God. We believe in Jesus Christ. We believe in his blood and salvation being the way to get to heaven, you know. And I think this is the key thing about this. The nation didn't fight back when people started to do that. When people started altering the truth to take it further and further away from God, Israel didn't hold tight and say, no, hold on a second. The one true God is the one true God. Well, what if we just prayed a little bit differently? What if we think this instead of that? What if we think instead of him being the Father, him being a whatever? Now you look at the state of the world now and how people view Christianity now. You have Christian churches all across the world that believe God isn't real. God is a woman. Jesus was just a prophet. There was other people in play here. You can be leaders of your own planet when you die. You know, all these different takes from different religions. All off of a truth that got corrupted and got twisted until it fit how you wanted to see it instead. And that's my kind of take on religion all over the world. God is the true God. He's the King of Kings, he's the Lord of Lords. Jesus Christ is the only way to heaven. If you believe in something else, then you're believing a lie. The hard thing about this is if you start allowing that lie to stick in your hearts, to stick in your heads, to stick in your church, wherever, it will corrupt and it will take you further and further from the truth. Anyone ever play the game Telephone? Where you like whisper into Abigail's ear and you go, Superman likes to... There you go, fly through the air, and then you go, boo, 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 boo. And then it says, you know, Solomia turns around and says, well, Superman's got really big hair. And you go, wait a minute, that's not what I said over here. I said Superman likes to fly through the air. Well, now he's got really big hair. And, you know, and just through the, 7 to 8 people here, that message could change completely. That's how the truth gets twisted so easily. You know, just through people in this room, it gets changed completely. And if we did that, it'd be fun, right? we make a game out of it. But that's how the Bible gets misinterpreted. That's how religions have been able to be twisted and changed to being accepted as truth nowadays. The fact that Israel allowed this to happen is a heartbreaking thing, knowing they were God's people. It talks about smiting the winter house with the summer house, and the houses of ivory shall perish. Archaeology confirms back in Samaria that wealthy people owned multiple different estates, and they would decorate it with ivory. And they would have houses, just like people do now, when they're like, oh, Washington State's a really nice place to be around in the summer, in the spring, in the fall, but as soon as it gets to winter, I'm going to Arizona, right? Because I want to be in the warm. People do that, I don't blame them. Sometimes the winter's pretty terrible. But that's kind of the same thing that was happening there, you know? Summer house, winter house, going to be different places. And we see that God isn't just going to destroy, he's actually going to smite, to strike down violently these houses. And I think that the thing about this is, when you build a house of lies, when you build and you corrupt a church to be something different, what did Jesus do when he went in and saw people selling stuff? Anyone remember? Whipped him into shape, literally, right? He ran in there and he started throwing tables over, and he made a cord into a whip and started whipping them and saying, you've made my father's house into a den of thieves, right? He had to clean the place because they had allowed corruption to sneak in and to change this house of the Lord into a house of money exchange, of people getting ripped off for sacrificial animals. And that's the real tough thing. If you see corruption in your church, in your life, in your belief of Jesus Christ, stamp it out. Get praying over it, get people to pray over it for you as well. And then surround yourself with the truth. Don't let it slide. Don't let the devil get a foothold in that, because he will pull you further and further away from the truth. So, God always preserves a remnant. And I think this is a really cool thing to think about. Even in judgment, even in times of judgment, his mercy leaves a seed for renewal. It wasn't a complete wiping out of Israel. They were still there. And they could still come back to him, you know? False religion, false security, and false wealth cannot save you. Only what is rooted in God survives when everything else collapses. Jesus Christ is the only way. Okay. That's what I got out of Amos 3 this week. I've got 3 final thoughts for you here. First one is privilege versus responsibility. Israel's blessing came with accountability. You have his blessing, God's given it to you, now you have to live the right way with that. Kind of like my buddy Johnny back in England, he got his driver's license. And as soon as he got his driver's license, what did he have? He had a privilege to drive, but then a responsibility to drive safe, to drive well. What did he do the night that he got his driver's license? Drove a car into a lamppost. Okay. And his parents were so gracious that actually they towed the car home, and whilst it was in the shop getting repaired, they let him drive their car to work. That's true grace, right? I don't know if I'd allow my kids to do that after seeing that record of one night, one crash. That's not very good. So you'd see that actually there's accountability that comes with responsibility and privilege, okay? And Israel's blessing came with accountability. So what I want you to think about is, what privileges has God given you? Your family, the Bible, your church that you belong to, and how are you looking after them? How are you stewarding those blessings in your life? Can you see them? Or are they kind of hard to see? Do you recognize them as blessings? Or is it tough to see that? Okay? Second thought here, the cause and effect of sin. We know what sin does. Sin is a cancer, and it grows in your body. And if you don't get rid of it, if you don't give it to Jesus, it will take over and it will pull you further and further away from the truth. Jesus Christ came down. He lived a perfect life. He died on a cross, a criminal's death, and took all of our sin and shame on his shoulders so that we could be washed clean, so that we could know him, so that we could get to heaven to be with the Father. That's the only way. So faith and trust and confessing our sins to Jesus Christ is the only way to do this. So the cause and effect of sin is it pulls you further away from Jesus. Jesus died for you. Jesus loves you. Even whilst you were in sin, Jesus died for you. That's the most amazing thing to think about here. But what smoke signals might God be showing you in your life that reveal deeper issues that you need to address? What little things are popping up right now? Is it a pride issue? Do you have addiction issues? Do you have anger issues? Is it lust issues? Whatever it is, catch it before it becomes too big. And then give it to God. Let him take it. Let him take it because he's able to. Because he's strong enough. Because he wants to. When Jesus died on that cross, he didn't say, "It is finished, now and never ever again." Right? He says, "It is finished. Done. That's it. It's all covered. It's all covered. Give it to Jesus. He can deal with your sins." And the most amazing thing about this is, I've told you guys very briefly about kind of my addictions in my teenage years of drugs and alcohol. When I gave it to Jesus, there was so much freedom. There was so much freedom. I can't even imagine, I tried to stop drinking 4 or 5 times on my own. That means I failed 4 or 5 times on my own, right? But the one time I gave it to Jesus, he was able to help me with that and heal me from that. I've not had a drink in 9 years because of Jesus Christ. I've not smoked any drugs, done any drugs since I was 14, 15 because of Jesus Christ. I'm 37 now. That's a long time. But when you realize what Jesus can do and what he can offer to you, is freedom from sin. The cause and effect is to pull you away and to sink more lies into you. The cure here is Jesus Christ, who just wants to tell you the truth. That you matter, that he loves you, and that your sin has been covered by his blood on the cross. If you look to him. So, think about that in your lives. When little things pop up, give them to Jesus. Don't be too proud to say, it's not that big of a deal. It's okay, I can just deal with it myself. I promise you that's where it starts. And it's a slippery slope to stand back up afterwards, okay? Give it to Jesus. Third one here, listening to warnings. God warned Israel through the book of Amos before judgment came. Who has God placed in your life to warn or to guide you? And are you listening to them or are you ignoring them? It's kind of one of those things that don't touch the stove because it's hot. I want to touch the stove. Or don't because it's hot. Can't be that hot, right? Then you go and touch the stove and, why didn't you tell me? They're like, I told you twice, what are you talking about? Are you listening to people or are you just thinking it's a joke? Army has a scar on his hand. I'm using you as an example tonight, I'm sorry. From when he was really young. And we had a toaster oven that was like on the counter like this. And the plug was underneath. It was a really frustrating situation. And we had to tell him it would be on your outside here, like in this kind of area. Maybe the other hand, I'm not sure. But he pulled it, he used to always go to that cable and try to hold himself up as he was a little toddler before he'd fall down, And he'd hold onto the cable and be like, I'm fine, it's okay. Then one day, it wasn't fine and okay, and it fell and it landed on his hand, and it burned like a lung. But how many times do you say to someone, don't do that, it's hot, ouch. Don't do that, it's hot, ouch. People still do it, Are you ignoring the people who are trying to help you? Are you actually listening to them? Because if people see something in your life and they go, hey, you're walking down a real dark path here, I'd watch out. Is it easy to kind of take that advice or is it hard? Maybe I'd ask you about pride. You can't accept people's help. That's a big deal. But give it to Jesus. Find someone who you trust to speak into your life, not just because they're a nice person. Sometimes you want that person that's going to say, hey, you're messing up real bad. And here's how it's going to work out.